All right, we'll get ourselves going and add folks as they come. Couple quick things. I am Katie Biggs from NeighborWorks Montana, and I am your room host for this particular breakout session. We are so excited to have you join us today. We ask, as you all have, to mute your lines and use the chat function for questions. We will try and address all questions before the end of the session. Just a couple quick housekeeping things. All sessions are being recorded. Like I said, please mute your lines and turn off your videos while the presenters are presenting. Please click the chat icon, select all panelists and attendees, and enter your name, organization, and location. That helps us get to know you. You may turn your video back on for your Q&A time. Each of you guys should have received a whiteboard paddle and marker in the mail if you registered before a certain time frame. If you find something inspiring, exciting, or new, write a quick adjective on the whiteboard and hold it up and let us know during the Q&A time at the end of the session. Today, I have the distinct honor of introducing you guys to a few great folks. We have Rosalie Sheehy Cates, we have Katie Rollyson, Lou Herr, and Linda Tracy. They will each introduce themselves, but before they start introducing themselves, our whole conversation today is about funding. Obviously, all of us struggle at times to find funding for our projects. We look for alternative means of funding. We look for how do we build relationships with funders, and we're going to try to address all of those questions for you. But right now, if you could throw into the chat your number one struggle when it comes to funding projects. Is it finding it? Is it building relationships? Is it figuring out what to ask for? What is your number one struggle that you have with funding? If you could drop that in the chat, that would be helpful to our conversation. Today, I would like to start with our folks introducing themselves. Why don't we start, Linda, since I see you up on the screen right now. We'll start with Linda, and then we'll move to Lou, Katie, and Rosalie. So Linda, please introduce yourself. Who are you? What do you work for? And what's your tie to funding projects?
My name is Linda Tracy, and I'm the Western Director for the Steele-Reese Foundation. And my principal job is to really be the liaison between nonprofits and governmental agencies in Idaho, Montana, and the tribal communities that share that geography, and our New York City-based trustees. All the wealth was created in New York City, so that's why all the trustees are in New York City, but the focus of the foundation has always been Idaho, Montana, and Appalachian Kentucky. In the earlier days, it was a few more states beyond that, but that's where we focus our funding now. We fund direct impact work in these rural communities. We fund general operating support as well as programmatic support. And about half of our applicants are working or proposing work in Indian country, and many of them are also Native-led nonprofit organizations.
Great, thanks. Lou, why don't you go for it?
Well, good morning, and thank you for the invitation to Montana and to your conference as well. I'm Lou Herr. I'm one of the two regional directors at the Otto Bremer Trust based in the Twin Cities of Minnesota. Our trust covers 4 states, Montana, North Dakota, Minnesota, and Wisconsin, which are specifically mentioned in Otto's trust. Otto Bremer was an immigrant who came over from Germany, and through his lifetime, became a successful business person, in particular in the financial services sector, banking. As he was nearing the end of his life, he wanted to create a lasting impact in the communities in which he had investments in. So,
do I need to sign that?
No, can you hear me? Okay, so that was specifically in the 4 states that were mentioned by Otto. So
just a minute.
I don't think that matters.
Guys, make sure you all are muted. I think we have someone who might not be on mute right now, or the video off. We're getting a little bit of a screenshot. So make sure you mute and turn off your videos if you're not presenting. Thanks.
I just thought it was the kind of impact I usually have in a group. So note that as well. But the Otto Bremer Trust, again, based out in the Twin Cities, covering the 4 states of Montana, North Dakota, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. I have the responsibility of managing our staff and our team in Montana and Wisconsin, which are our 2 newest additions to the work that we have been doing since the 1940s there as well. Prior to recently, Our definition of communities was defined by our largest asset base, which were the banks in which we own. So we're in addition to being a private foundation, we're also a bank holding company that generates most of our assets from the profits of the bank. So we own 92% of the bank, a Bremer bank in the three of the four states as well. Our work is pretty broad in the sense that we can do general operating, project or program or capital. And as long as it encompasses work that's impacting folks within the four states, as well as it falling within the legal trust instrument that Otto left behind. And there are 9 trust paragraph purposes that dictate what we can and are not funding as part of our work there as well. So that allows us kind of to see exactly what we can do. We will fund things in 4 major categories: basic needs, community asset building, health and well-being, restorative and emergency services. Within that, we see a broad variety of requests that come to us. We're also one of the largest general operating funders within the territories in which we have had presence. We anticipate that that would be the case also in the new territories in Montana and Wisconsin as well. Okay, I get the privilege of working directly with 3 trustees who work with who manage and oversee the trust operations directly, and so we get the privilege of working with them on a day-to-day basis. Back before COVID, it was in person, but we are honored to be able to work with them directly, and they are also legally responsible for making every single decision about requests that come to us. Okay. We have traditionally had 4 grant rounds. We are looking at additional grant rounds in the next year. We also have undergone the last 2 years here a significant revision in our application process, and shortly within the week here, we will be announcing and releasing the next application deadlines as well. So be on alert if you do want to approach us for grants as well.
Great, Lou, and make sure you drop that link in the chat for folks to be able to find you. Katie, could you go ahead and share a little bit about yourself?
That's something you want to say?
Oh, Susan McCord, could you please mute yourself real quick? All right, there we go. Katie, go ahead.
Great, thank you. Yeah, thank you for having me. So my name is Katie Rollyson, and I'm with the Wells Fargo Foundation. I also wanted to recognize Jane Pavic. She's in the session as well. We're kind of partners in crime usually at the housing conference, especially when it's in person. And so I just wanted to recognize her as well. So I've been with Wells Fargo 18 years on the community relations side, 8 years supporting Montana and Wyoming. And just recently I took over supporting Alaska in the same capacity just this year. And so I'm based in Denver, but I work remotely to help support these states. And really collaboration is the key. Montana does it well, especially in housing. And we, really enjoy working with all of the housing organizations and the work that you're doing around for affordable housing. So kind of just the mission through Wells Fargo is through our businesses and the Wells Fargo Foundation, we align our resources and expertise to make a positive impact in communities, address complex societal issues, and help build a more inclusive, sustainable future for all. So there's been many changes over our foundation and our funding history or our funding focus areas over the years. And what my primary role is to connect the Montana community organizations with the philanthropic resources at Wells Fargo. And many times that's also our business, our products and our services as well to be able to help in our communities. So some examples of these connections are community grant programs that are in Montana, but we also have national programs as well. The focus areas of our granting right now, where the priorities are given to organizations that have focuses in housing affordability, financial health, small business growth, sustainability, and environmental justice. And then priority is placed on the nonprofit programmings that support low to moderate income communities, addressing racial and social equity, and accelerating an inclusive economy. Sometimes we're not always able to make grants to organizations, but we have other community resources. One of the big things that we have is our employee volunteerism. Our local Montana team, they're so generous with their time, and they really work together to enhance our overall community support. We have programs like Wells Fargo Builds that are through Habitat for Humanity, where we donate money and time to help with building homes through them. Also teaching hands-on banking, and our hands-on banking resources are something that's also available to the community. So really it's combining these resources, working together, utilizing our expertise to help community partners like you to help strengthen our communities in Montana.
Thanks, Katie. And Rosalie comes at it with a little different angle from funding, but with a really great perspective. Rosalie, will you please introduce yourself?
Sure will. Thanks, Katie. Thanks, everybody. I'm not sure why I'm here with all these amazing folks, but I'm humbled and honored to be joining this wonderful panel. And I'm really honored to join all the Montana housing folks. I was just speaking with a builder this morning, actually just a few minutes before I got on the call, and we were talking about this kind of almost destructive energy that's just buzzing through the housing sector. It doesn't feel good, this hot market and the rising costs and the very uncertain policy environment. It's really, I mean, I think I just want to acknowledge how painful, how not growing it is for those of you that are involved in it on a day-to-day basis. So I guess I'm saying thank you for your service, Montana Housers. And I hope there's anything I can do at all to help with your super important work. So I have just one skinny little part of this, and I don't do any funding with grants. I help foundations and individuals make impact investments. And that has included making investments directly into loan funds mostly for CDFIs, but for any kind of affordable housing projects. So that's the part that I'll cover. I love operating grants, but I don't do them. I just am kind of a conduit for helping people make investments into projects themselves or into loan funds. So we'll say more about that as we go along. Thank you.
Yeah, and it's a very vital and important part for a lot of us. So we're going to get into our conversation. There was several in the chat about, one of the biggest struggles is how do you build relationships with organizations you're going to fund? And I'm going to tie that together with our first question of what do you look for from a potential organization, and how do you build relationships? So can we kind of demystify the wall of nonprofit and funder? We're going to shake up our order. Katie, let's start with you.
So I would say that when we're working with organizations right now, the key is the focus areas that I mentioned. So for this conversation, just the housing affordability is key. We've really moved and are moving into the future for the impact, really looking at how many affordable housing units or what's out there from that standpoint. From the education piece, how many people are getting education to be homeowners, to be renters, to be successful. We're also looking at from homelessness of getting out of the poverty cycle, getting people back engaged and not having to be paycheck to paycheck. So a lot of it is just engaging that way with organizations. And sometimes, there is limited funding as a funder, and it's hard for us to say no, because there's so many great projects and there's so many great things happening that we'd love to fund everything. But a lot of the times too, it's still building that relationship. Even if we're not able to fund you now, we may be able to fund you in the future. We may have resources that can help. So it still is great to build up those relationships, even if the funding's not happening right away.
That's great, Katie. Thank you. Linda, we'll go to you. Can you answer kind of that question of what do you look for and how do people get a hold of you, reach you, build relationship with you?
Well, and Katie, I appreciate the points that you just made because they're also quite true for our perspective as well. In particular, I like to try to find ways to develop or deepen relationships before there's a grant application on the table, before there is any of that sort of additional stress. So I urge people to contact me between August and December to have a conversation about just to introduce me to themselves and to their organization and to their work and how the world looks from your perspective. And I have between 90 and 150 of those kinds of conversations each year. I find that it really gives me a lot more of a background and a sense than a letter of inquiry or application ever could. And just as Katie was saying, there are ways in which we as funders can potentially bring more value to you beyond a grant. And those may involve linking you to other people doing similar work in other places, or in the background, talking to other funders who may be interested in your work, whether that is specifically on a one-on-one basis, which I often do, or in the context of a funder call or working group of funders. So think about, I know not every foundation or every funding source allows you the opportunity to reach out and talk to someone, but where you have those opportunities, take full advantage of them to be able to develop those relationships for both current funding opportunities, potential future funding opportunities, and potential other resources that funder may have to share with you.
That's a great word, Linda. Thank you so much. Rosalie, can you give us a little perspective of how you are that connector and how that relationship's built as a connection from your standpoint? And then we'll close out with you, Lou.
Yeah, I was thinking about how to talk to housing organizations about going to private investors for investment in the actual capital stack of a project or in your loan fund, in the fund that you make housing loans out of. And so that's a little bit of a leap from your normal grant relationship. I would say the most common way that happens, let's just envision a trapeze for the foundation. They're in a circus and they're holding on to one trapeze. It's called a grant. And there's another one coming in toward them and it's called an investment. And that's a pretty big moment to let go of the grant trapeze and grab onto the investment one. It's a new skill. And it's most often done with somebody they already know. They don't say, oh, now I want to become an investor. It might be more like, we'll just pick on Lou. Otto Bremer's been doing this great grant funding. They're super interested in moving mental health housing forward. They just can't seem to find that final, yard line. And so they say, well, we need a demonstration project. And we're actually going to get involved directly in the capital stack in a rural area because we just believe in this so much. Now, why would they do that? Because the organization is financially strong and because they know them really well and because they have a very, very good project plan. So if you bring all those things together, I know the funder, I have a great project plan. What was the last one I said? I forgot, but all those important things, then that's the time where you could start talking with a funder that you already know to say, we've got a hole in the capital stack and somebody's got to do this to show how this happens. So that's kind of the switch from working with funders as grantors to moving towards getting them into your capital stack. The most typical way for a foundation to get involved in impact investing is not to do a big wholesale change of heart and start becoming investors. It's a project that leads most foundations into impact investing. So it's a good project with somebody that they know. I guess I'll just start with that. And you know me, Katie, I'm full of stories.
No, that's a great word. And I love the angle you bring to it. Lou, why don't you wrap us up with this particular set of questions? What do you look for from potential organizations and how do organizations build that relationship?
Yeah, it's almost ironic that we have to have this kind of conversation, right? How do you talk to people? I think one of the things, I've done this for almost 2 decades now, and it's always interesting to me to have to demystify the power dynamics that I think the foundation world has developed over its start. I mean, we're talking about centuries of power dynamics that I think folks have gotten accustomed to. And so we spend a lot of time trying to demystify that power dynamic in particular to really welcome the conversations, not only about grant making, but also to educate us about what's going on the ground. And so we work a tad bit different in the sense that we are a responsive funder. And so we aim not to drive an outcome or to prescribe an approach, but really to look at what folks are confronted with in their own communities, yes, at the same time, it fits within the trust we can take a look at. So we can't do our work without, grantees and partners. I mean, that's the bottom line. And so our staff, even though we are a very small number, we strive to be accessible. We strive to also continually learn about what's going on as well. In a way, we want to meet you where you are and where your organization is. What we do look for from potential organizations when we look at our funding is there are some legal pieces, but there are also some practical pieces as well. Of course, the geography has to be within the 4 states that we cover. Activities to fund within our trust instrument, there are 9 paragraphs with purposes that we look to make sure we are obligated, mandated to report our grant making to the court. So we are obligated to make sure that we're aligned with that as well. Relevancy to the community needs. We're always looking to make sure that, yes, even though it says we can fund it, does it truly make sense and is it relevant to the community? Of course, the big piece that most foundations are looking at is what's the impact, right? For us, it's not prescribed. We don't come in and go, well, we want the needle to move a certain way. We're simply wanting to know exactly how do you gauge and how do you know that things are working, okay? And lastly, on that piece, on that category there, we also want to look at your organizational effectiveness. How are you doing this well?
Hello.
In many ways, we're asking the question, how is your organization, continually learning to be better? We also ask, what can we do to help the organization do its work, which is rare in the foundation world as well. With that, how do we build our relationships with organizations? Of course, it always comes out in application reviews. Those are opportunities for us to engage with folks. But our staff in particular are trained and are required and expected to conduct community engagement and also have presence in the community. I've said this over the years that I've been with the Otto Bremer Trust. You can't be a place-based funder if you're not present in the community. As with the disclaimer of this COVID-19, of course, but we typically are within the community. If you can get down to the important things that matter to a local community, I think you do better grant making as a result of that, okay? Thirdly, intermediary connections, folks like NeighborWorks, folks like associations and community foundations, and folks like that, who are the eyes and ears on the ground for us. And lastly, but I think most importantly, it's folks like yourselves that help inform and educate us not only on the issues, but the dynamics of what's going on in the state, in your local communities there. You're the richest resource for us in terms of knowing what are relevant investments that we can make.
Thanks, Lou. Lou, I love that you addressed the power dynamics, and Linda and Katie and Rosalie, you all kind of hit on that. I think sometimes as someone who's in the funding world, who asks for money, you guys sometimes can appear as mightier than thou, and we don't know how to approach you. And I love that each of you has brought such a relational approach to this. We just, personally, NeighborWorks Montana appreciate you all so much, and are thankful that you can share this with this audience of, come talk to us, come give us a call. We want to hear from you. And I think, if folks take nothing else, take that away, that, you can approach these folks, because, Linda was really right. There's many foundations that don't, let you do that, but the ones that do, start building those relationships. I love that.
Can I say something, Katie?
Yeah, go for it, Rosalie.
I think, and here goes the crosstalk, and Rosalie's gonna break it up. Oh, well. Don't you think, my compadres here, that Black Lives Matter and the events of the past 2 years have also made us, we're trying to actually break down our old relationships. I mean, we realize that we've talked to the same people a lot, or the smallest of people, the smallest of organizations, the newest. Okay, who's that going to be? That's going to be the people of color. The least powerful are not getting through our doors. So I just think there's a lot of interest in, creating those personal relationships that break out of, older networks. And believe me, when I was starting to do this 25 years ago, those networks were old. Let's break that down.
Yeah,
I don't know if you other panelists would say anything about that.
That's a great word. So, Lou touched on it very briefly because they're in Minnesota and it's COVID. How has COVID changed the way you are funding or seeing funders fund? Rosalie, why don't we start with you? How has COVID changed the way you're seeing investors fund projects or put capital? Is that changing things?
Kind of more of a cut to the chase. Nobody has time to fluff around with stuff. And, and I feel like people are just cutting to the core questions in my case, on underwriting. We're not going to go to the nth degree on it. We know we've done this a long time. So I'd say things are quicker, a little bit more of a sense of, crisis or emergency, a real emphasis on getting things done.
Great. Yeah, that's good to know. Lou, what are you seeing COVID do to the way the Otto Bremer Trust is funding projects or looking at things?
Yeah, I think the greatest contribution that we have in COVID-19 is to continue to be consistent. I think it's too often foundations are too eager to make put the next footprint down or, re-envision what they do. For us, it's the day-to-day work and it's the consistency in terms of the scope of work that we can encompass, going back to Otto's original intent, and staying committed to being a broad funder of many broad issues, but also approaches as well too. And so what we have promised and what we continue to actualize is simply to continue to invest in communities based upon what Otto wanted, to continue to provide the flexibility in terms of where funding can be applied to. And I think that is more than anything else, that's reassuring communities that funders like us will be around to continually address those issues there as well. We don't chase issues that are hot. Again, being a responsive funder, we want organizations and communities to come to us to say, this is what's impacting our communities, rather than us searching for that. We are seeing some funders, move to different priorities or shift priorities. There was significant, interest, particularly after the George Floyd murder there, and what other funders were funding along with COVID. It kind of happened all at the same time here. We're now seeing some Dante, the murder of Dante as well too, is also going to likely impact how funders do. But those funders are also very metropolitan based in the Twin Cities. And so with that, what we're finding from what we're hearing from nonprofits is some angst about, well, but if foundations shift to those particular areas, what does it mean for areas in which they've had investments before? So going back to my conversation earlier, is simply, we want to commit, we want to continue to stay consistent and stable in terms of providing funding to the things that really matter with regards to Otto's trust. And so that's our guarantee to our communities.
That's great. Linda, could you touch on how COVID has affected things from the Steele-Reese side?
Certainly, but I'm going to start before COVID started to say that really what we fund are not the applications we receive, but we fund leaders. So we look for that leadership piece. And so when COVID hit last March, I called all of our existing grantees and those who were midstream in preparing an application. So about 100 calls to people just in that beginning phase of who knew what was going on, to say, how are you? How's your organization? How are your people? How's your family? And do you need this funding from us to be unrestricted? Do you need to repurpose this grant in some way? Do you need to extend your timeline? What do you need? And if you don't know right now, that's fine. Just know that you've got some flexibility here. And we know as the leader that you are, you're going to figure it out. You're going to figure out the best way forward. And we want to support you in that. And I have to say that it was one of the most humbling times for me because of the awesome leaders that we have in the nonprofit sector in Idaho and Montana, and just the ways in which people were responding to this very fluid and uncertain circumstance, and just further reinforce that value of funding for leadership. So and also at the same time, we did have some conversations about what would be helpful going forward in terms of our process. And as a result, we have shortened our timeline for our grant cycle by 2.5 months, which makes it a little harder for me, but that's okay. I can cope. And we are more explicit about offering general operating support. And we have shortened our application. We have shortened our final report, and just taken a broader look at what we were asking, what we were doing with that information. Did we need to continue asking those questions? Was there a better way to ask those kinds of questions? And we are still in a learning process, and those who have used our application this year, hopefully will be able to give us.
Oh, we lost your sound, Linda. We lost your sound for a second. We'll go to Katie and we'll come back to you, Linda. Katie, why don't you?
Yeah, so kind of similar what Linda was saying, that we, prior to COVID, were announcing our focus areas, and then COVID hit, and we found that those areas of focus are the hardest that were impacted by COVID. And so continuing that work now, we quickly responded and changed all of our funding to get it out right away to help with COVID, but being flexible to letting the organizations utilize that, because things changed day to day, week to week, month to month. So, and there's still changes. So we know that that's still evolving and that's still happening. I think one of the things that we've found is that collaborative effort around COVID, the innovation, because organizations, communities have had to pivot and change so quickly and so drastically, that I think that piece has been a key for us of that innovative space too, where I think it's working smarter, not harder, and working together to get to the end goal. And so that's some of the things that we've really learned and utilized as far as working with the partners and being able to engage that way.
Great. I love the theme across all boards. Rosalie mentioned quick and effective, and the rest of you guys mentioned flexibility, and it was that relationship. It all comes back to that relationship that you have with the folks that you're funding. One of the things that was mentioned in the chat is that, you know, there's so many different deadlines with so many different foundations and so many different opportunities. How do nonprofits figure out the opportunities you offer? What are your tips to them to figure out that, hey, I am available, I do offer this? What kind of expertise? And Katie, since you're still on the screen, we'll start there. This is just a, you know, real nitty gritty practical question.
I would say that the key is, before you reach out to an organization, to look at their website, to look at what they're funding, and then ask the question accordingly. Because I think that if you can't find it, then let the funder, let that be the question. But I think in general, a lot of the times that people can kind of look and see, and then you can kind of see that alignment. Because I think for me, when something's so far out of the box, it's harder to engage with that organization. So you kind of need to know the audience of where you're asking the question, and do your research, because I think then you can have a much better conversation when you know what the organization's looking for. And if you're trying to make something fit or make it align, that way you're going to have that better conversation with them. And even if it doesn't maybe necessarily directly align, you can still have those conversations. But if you're going in blindly and just sending that email, hey, what are you funding? It just kind of shows that you aren't doing as much of the research, because I think it's a two-way street, that you need to be educated on the ask, and what you're to incorporate that ask, what that funder is looking for.
Great. Linda, why don't we pick you back up? And if you had any closing thoughts from the last question, then also, you know, how do we, as nonprofits, figure out the opportunities you offer?
And I apologize, my phone dropped the call. I don't know. But one of the key pieces, and certainly please do take a look at our websites. And if we've got materials on the website that you can download, for instance, we've got our letter of inquiry worksheet from the previous grant cycle. Take a look at it so that you know what kinds of questions we are looking for answers to, and it just helps you get that much more in depth when we do have a conversation. But I think one of the other things that I would suggest are ask your peers, who have they been funded by, what is their experience with program officers and what their interests are, or how approachable is someone, or is this more of a blind opportunity to drop something over the transom and potentially get funded? So ask who they haven't been funded by and what that experience was like and what they might have learned from that. The other thing is that you can look on candid.org, which is that conglomeration that was formerly the Foundation Center and I think merging with GuideStar. If you want to get beyond the paywall, many of our public libraries in the state of Montana and university libraries have subscriptions to their service, so you can look at the Foundation directory online as another way of finding out who all might be funding in the kind of work that you are doing. So, and Andrea asks what the directory is again, and it's the Foundation directory online. Go to candid.org and follow the route to look at the funding side of things. But let me also tell you that candid.org has the nonprofit side of things as well. So we can be looking at your presence on that site, and not a lot of people, I think, on the nonprofit side have yet taken advantage of the opportunity to toot your own horn, to be able to articulate what you're about. And so I might encourage you to check out that space and see if that helps you be able to communicate to a broader audience what you're working on and what your priorities are.
It's a great resource. Thank you so much, Linda. Lou, why don't you give us a quick snapshot of what the best way to figure out opportunities you guys offer?
Yeah, and I think as most of us said, who doesn't have a website now, right? So I think that's a good start there, but I think it can get overwhelming to go through these foundations and try to figure out what folks are funding, what they aren't. So I think the best way is just to have a conversation with us. But as Katie mentioned earlier, be prepared to at least have some collective thought about what you want to achieve with those conversations. I think the hardest conversation for me is, here's our pick. It would be a scenario in which folks say, here's our pick list. You pick what you want from us. That really shows me you haven't done your homework to figure out what your greatest priority coming to us for with that. And we're not in the business of picking what you from a list. We're interested in knowing what's going on in the community. What are you doing to address it? How do you know it's having an impact, or how do you know it's effective? That's what some of the basic 3 questions we're looking for with that. I think your state associations, like the Montana Nonprofit Association, by the way, just kudos, one of the better associations around, are definitely good connections to understand exactly what foundations are looking at. Beyond that, I think the more important question is, how do they do their work? So that you can understand exactly, and here's what a pointer for you. I actually wish folks would ask me this particular question, which I have not ever had anybody ask me, but I know you guys are going to ask me now that I tell you this, okay? Which is, what are you looking for in your questions or your applications? Okay? Foundations all have their questions, they all have their applications, and that's the key, is to figure out exactly what they want to interpret by those questions and application processes with that, so that you can then articulate exactly what content they want you to hear. Now, for us, we know our website well, and it's hard to see applications that regurgitate our website. What we want to do is truly hear the voices of the folks that are out in the community doing that work that are there. Again, conversations with our program staff are not only encouraged, but I think they're significantly important to know that you're on the right trajectory. If we can tell you, the level of confidence we might have in looking at a request, that'll give you the best information. We also have a 1 grant at a time policy. So if you're not putting in the best work in your application, you're going to have to wait 12 months to come back to us with the new application. So we truly want to have that conversation and those opportunities. But when we do have those conversations, we want them to be fruitful. We want them to be helpful for you folks as well too. I would also say, don't be afraid to get discouraged by those conversations. I think too often folks call to say, I want to hear what I want to hear, versus I want to hear that it's not fruitful for me to put in X amount of hours to do that application. And I think those are great conversations to have so that you can spend more time on the very complicated federal grants that come your way, per se. Okay. For us also, it's opportunities for us to learn outside of grant making. And I think that's the one piece where a lot of nonprofits and foundations don't align very well. For us, we want to learn outside of that grant making process. Call us not only to say, how do I get grant funds, but call us to say, you know what, housing is such a significant issue in Montana. And by the way, this is where the gaps are. This is where the opportunities are. Is this something that we can consider? Or even just to simply say, you might have not heard, but in central Montana, this is what's going on. Because we value that input and that information and that knowledge to inform our work and recommendations to the trustees as well. So again, we look forward to those opportunities. And I would love for folks to not only think about our foundation in particular as it's simply the relationship between a conversation and a grant, but really to inform us about how we can do our work best.
It's a great word. Thank you, Lou. And Rosalie, how do our folks figure out, hey, this person could be an investor, this person would be interested? Where do they even begin that process? And I know you could probably spend an hour on that, but Reader's Digest version, where do they begin that process to know what is offered?
Sure. Well, for starters, I love that conversation, and I actually am happy to have a 30-minute phone call to see if it seems like there's investment in the project that you're doing and if it's possible. So I'm always happy, literally, just to hop on the phone and discuss it. I was going to just throw out a couple of examples and just try to give you an idea of what it's like to actually request investment as opposed to a grant. An example, just this morning, just to give you the flavor of the types of projects. I was working with a community foundation in North Carolina, and they're going to look at guaranteeing a bank loan for a little nonprofit that's going to train people that have just gotten out of prison in house building. They're going to buy a house, rehab it, and flip it. It's very simple. It's easy to underwrite. And the community foundation, the bank is interested. It's a kind of a philanthropic loan on their part. And the foundation will guarantee it. It's only going to be, there's just a $22,000 guarantee that the foundation has to provide just to make the whole thing work. So what's the key document there? And I love talking with you guys in housing because you know all the financing documents, and they just need a sources and uses that's really accurate. That's what ties everybody together. Where's the money coming from? What's it going to be used for? That's going to help them all understand that they're on the same page to do a loan guarantee. So that's one example. Yeah. And also did another guarantee situation. I see we have Habitat for Humanity on the phone, and Habitat in Bellingham decided to do 46 houses over 2 years as opposed to the one or two houses a year model. We got somebody that needs to mute, I think. Thank you. Anyway, again, the community foundation, this time it was in the many millions of dollars, but a bank did the construction loan for this very large development. First time Habitat did a multi-unit development, and the foundation provided a guarantee for that. Again, super numbers oriented. It has to work financially. And that's actually how we know, that's some of the relationship or management capacity stuff that we're doing. If the financials are a mess and the financial projections are a mess, that's not the right person for us to be lending money to. So that's kind of it. And I think to find out about it, well, another one, we have Andrea on the phone, and a group of private investors helped to reserve a piece of land that all the other sources of housing financing weren't quite in. So a group of private investors actually stepped in to help hold a piece of land. So there's a lot of ways to use financing. I mean, basically anywhere that you can repay a loan. If you have the right relationship with high net worth people or with foundations, you may be able to find a way to get that financing done.
Yeah, that's a great word of advice, Rosalie. I know that whole side of things, the investor side can be really, really even more daunting than the foundation side. But it's
But
been
you guys do know it because you're
Yeah.
doing financing. So
yeah, it's been a very fun space for NeighborWorks Montana to fit into. So guys, we have about 15 minutes left, and we would love to use these folks as experts. We would love it if you guys have any questions to go to the reactions button below and raise your hand. You could do a raise your hand, and we will try to get these in an orderly manner. Or you are more than welcome to throw your question in the chat and I can read it to these folks. But if you have any questions, these are your times to ask Lou, Linda, Katie, or Rosalie a quick question. Anyone has any, let me know. Man, you guys nailed it so much that no one has any questions for you, or we're all ferociously typing. We'll give it just 30 more seconds. All right, well, if there's no questions, I would love for the four of you just to kind of, as we start to look at wrapping this up, offer a quick word of encouragement, any last parting thoughts, anything that you can give to this group of nonprofit folks that is looking at raising money for projects for their organizations. And Rosalie, we'll just start with you since you're on my screen. Oh, we did have a quick question. This one is for Lou. What were the top questions that you wanted to see addressed in the proposal, Lou?
Yeah, I think, again, I mentioned it earlier, you know, our basic approach is trying to understand what's going on in the community, what are you doing to address it, and how do you know that it is effective or having the impact that you desire or that you want it to do. And so I know our questions are a little bit more elaborate than that, but at the end of the day, that's probably the summary that I can best give to you. When I'm reviewing a proposal or I'm looking at an organization or a new concept, I'm always asking those three questions to make sure that I continually understand that it's relevant, that it's going to have impact, and that you know, that there's sustainability in the sense of you know, continued growth in that organization and the work that you're trying to do. You know, I often give the example of, you know, folks that come to us for, let's say, to build a new senior center, you know, and yet in the community that they're working on, 90% of the folks there are kids who are, you know, up to 18. We probably don't want to do a senior center. You know, we might want to focus on a youth center instead. A very basic model there, but I think it's important for us to really, you know, not be so overly complicated, but to try to get to those three questions with that. And as you probably have heard me, I've not used the word evaluation in the conversation with that. And I also wanted to note with Rosalie triggered, you know, a conversation in my head. You know, for foundations like ourselves, we're not simply sending out checks. I mean, we are truly making investments in the work that folks are doing. And if you look at it from that standpoint, that might help you frame how you come to us in terms of understanding exactly what is the return that we're trying to make with that. And so we use the terminology investing quite often. And it's not only just grants, but investing in terms of program-related investments as well. But we truly want to see outcomes based upon what we invest in. And so we truly want to use that vernacular to really understand exactly that there is significant traction within the community and that those things are going to get accomplished. So, so there are a little bit more, there are more questions than just those three. But at the end of the day, I think it's those three questions that are at the heart of what we're trying to get to our trustees to make the decision.
Yeah, that's great. So Andrea from Homeward asked a phenomenal question. She said, I understand many funders will be asking grantees how they are addressing diversity, equity, and inclusion practices. Do you guys, and please feel free to chime in, whoever wants to answer this, or multiple perspectives, do you suggest a standard approach or approach for organizations to expand their knowledge and shift in culture? What's your recommendation as we look for this diversity, equity, and inclusion practice conversation?
I can jump in. It is something that is definitely top of mind. It is something that we are definitely trying to incorporate into our granting and how we can, I mean, I think tying back to COVID, I mean, it really showed the disparities in communities, especially Native American communities, and just the disconnect of rural as well, and just the lack of resources that are there to help quickly, even coming to communication and internet and things like that for resources. And so I don't think that it's a standard approach necessarily. I think that it's it's kind of that transitional year to really see how that's incorporating, because I know in Montana, and I know on the discussion earlier, that when you're in a community that isn't as diverse, how do you address it? And I think right now the key is just talking about it and seeing where there's opportunities. And so it may not be something that's in the application right away and the standard approach or anything like that, but I think in the future it's something to kind of keep top of mind, to include in your applications of how you're supporting those communities, and or if that's something that you're going to be doing into the future.
That's great. Lou, Linda, or Rosalie, any thoughts there?
Go ahead, Rosalie. And Linda.
This has just been not difficult in Montana, but it's different than it is in other places. So much of the last year has been about Black Lives Matter, and we have a really limited Black population in Montana. However, we have 7 tribes that are independent nations within our state. And so I think for statewide organizations, there will be an expectation that you have an authentic, relationship with tribal entities, especially in the communities that you serve. That's just the bare minimum. There's no standard. It has to be authentic. On the other hand, we also know that tribal governments are doing this work themselves. And so it's a new relationship, or it might be one where they're saying we're doing this themselves. So I just kind of acknowledge that it's a little more tricky in Montana. I've talked with Brenda at Headwaters Health Foundation, and she's just saying, God, I work in all these little rural communities, and believe me, there's systemic equity problems. She feels they are somewhat less color-based, but that the inequities are a lot around gender and social class, and they're awful. So I think it's a hard case for Montana organizations to make when they go to national funders, and maybe we're just behind the line right now because Black communities really are out there to show that we need to be getting attention there. And we don't have those in Montana. So this might just be a reality for the present moment, but it is a great time to do authentic diversity and equity work within your organization. It's a great time to say, hey, I love my board, but they're all in the same network. I need to tap a new network here. I think those things are all true. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, that was great. Linda or Lou, any comments on that?
Just that when we are looking at what you all are proposing to do, we are also looking at to what degree are the people that are going to be served by what you're proposing to do reflected on your staff, reflected in your board. And we have a specific series of questions that we ask of anyone who's proposing to do work in Indian country to try to get to that point that Rosalie was just making about authentic relationships. Do you already have a relationship, or are you trying to helicopter something in? And to what degree has that community articulated that this is their priority and that they want to be working with you if you're not an organization that's right in their backyard? And that people have been involved from that community in identifying what the it is that they want to see happen and how it will happen and who will be involved. Are local people going to be hired for this project? And those kinds of things. So the degree to which you can articulate that, that connection to the people you're serving as reflected in your process, your people on staff, and your people on your board helps us better understand your connection to that work and that community.
Lou, any closing thoughts on that?
I think that's the I've seen this on the horizon years ago. It is the new and also the hip hop thing to do right now, right? A lot of folks talk about diversity, equity, inclusion. My view would be, my personal view is that it is such a much more deeper
Mm.
issue than I think folks make it to be. We don't require it as an organization. In fact, I would say that we've always had an expectation that that folks understand, and we don't frame it as diversity and equity, but I think for us, I think it matters more about how you connect to the people you serve or impact, or that you could serve or impact. Okay, and so we're not looking at particular, particular effort, particular approach. I think diversity, equity, inclusion is, to me, needs to be at a level to effectively address it, needs to be done as we would do mental health per se, because the trauma behind it is so significant. I think a lot of organizations want to do it because it's the next thing to do, but I would caution folks from really thinking that, getting a training at a 1-hour conference is going to help you facilitate it. Well, we don't, at the organization, at the Otto Bremer Trust, we probably have funded many diversity, equity, inclusion efforts. We don't mandate it. We don't have a focus on that. But we do have an expectation that folks' work are relevant to who they're serving and who they're not serving, so that we can make sure that those are delivered in the best way possible. So for us, it's not something that we've elevated. We do end up funding some of those work, but at the same time as well too, I think I don't think we're quite there yet in terms of our own knowledge base to elevate it to a level where we're prioritizing funding for it.
That's a great word. And that takes us to our time. Rosalie, Linda, Katie, and Lou, I appreciate the 4 of you so much. And personally, I invited them all because I have great relationships. We've used them in relationships and we love them very, very much. And I hope all of you on this call will reach out to them, gain some of their expertise, and just chat with them, because they, beyond what they do in their professional lives, they're really great human beings. So we appreciate what you all are doing in this space. We can't wait to be together at some point in person. For all of you who are joining us, thank you for joining this session. Remember, you can always participate in the community conversation through the Whova app to chat more. Lou, Katie, Linda, and Rosalie have all put their contact info in the chat, so you can scroll through that. For those of you, we'll all now be on a 1-hour lunch break and look forward to having you join us back in breakout sessions at 1. So have a great day, everyone, and thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.